Every summer the fair came back to Harbor Light, and every summer Nora Bellamy set out the same folding table at the edge of the midway and read palms for tips. A hand-lettered sign leaned against the sugar tin. What your hands already know. Beneath it, in smaller letters, her grandmother had painted 20 summers before, Tips as the spirit moves you. She had read 1,000 palms at this table. Only one of them still kept her awake. The last prediction of the last night of last summer, given to a stranger with a scar across his hand, a thing she would have given a year of tips to unsay. She did not know that he had decided to come back and make it true. The June heat pressed down thick as syrup. Fried dough sweetened the air, and under it ran the green smell of trampled grass and the tin tang of the lemonade stand 2 booths down. A carousel wheezed its waltz somewhere behind her. Nora fanned herself with a paper plate and turned the hand that lay open on her table. A woman's hand, soft, ringed, smelling faintly of coconut sunscreen. "You've been holding your breath since April," Nora said. The woman laughed, startled. "How do you—" "This line here." Nora traced the crease under the fingers without quite touching. "It goes deep, and then it stops, like you keep starting things and slamming the door on yourself. You quit something, or you're about to." "My job." The woman's laugh went thin. "I haven't told anyone." "You just told your hand. I only read it out loud." Nora tilted the palm toward the string lights, though it was still bright out. An old habit, a bit of theater her grandmother swore was worth an extra $1. "Here's the part you came for. You're not afraid of leaving. You're afraid of being right about leaving. That's a different thing, and it's a braver thing, and you already know which one you are." The woman's eyes went bright and wet at the corners. She pressed a folded 10 into the sugar tin and held Nora's fingers a second too long. "Are you always right?" "Only about strangers," Nora said. "Never about myself. Enjoy the fair." She watched the woman walk off toward the Ferris wheel, straighter than she'd come. That was the trick of it, the only real magic Nora believed in. You didn't tell people their future. You told them the thing they'd already decided and were too scared to hear in their own voice. Give it back to them in a fortune-teller's voice, and suddenly it was permission. "You made her cry again," said Maggie from the lemonade stand, not looking up from the wedge she was slicing. Maggie had run that stand since before Nora was tall enough to see over the counter, and she had the sunburned, unbothered air of a woman who had watched 40 summers roll through this field and expected to bury none of her opinions unspoken. "Third one today. People pay you to cry. I sell them sugar water and they complain about the ice. You give them joy. I give them permission. Permission's more expensive. Permission doesn't cover your table fee." Maggie wiped her hands on her apron and nodded at the sugar tin. "How much you got in there, honestly?" Nora didn't count it in front of her. She didn't have to. "Enough for tonight." "That's not what I asked, and you know it." She did know it. That was the trouble with people who'd known you since you were small. They could hear the space around the thing you weren't saying. Nora tucked a loose, dark curl behind her ear and turned her grandmother's thin brass ring around her finger, once, the way she did when a question came too close. The fair around them was in full evening swing now, though the sky over the harbor still held its blue. Bare-shouldered teenagers drifted past in clusters, sticky and laughing. A little boy ran by trailing a red balloon, shrieking with delight, his father jogging happily behind. The smell of hot caramel corn rolled through, then diesel from the generator trucks, then the salt breath of the water beyond the parking field. Somewhere a bell rang, and a barker promised that everyone was a winner. "The fair's only got 3 summers left in it," Maggie said, quieter now. "You hear that? The Ellisons are selling the fairground. Some developer. This whole field will be condominiums with a name like Harbor Point, and a fountain nobody's allowed to touch." Nora's stomach dropped, though she kept her face smooth. "They've been saying that for 10 years.
They weren't holding an offer for 10 years. Marlene saw the paper. Maggie let it sit. You should think about what you do when the table's got nowhere to stand. I'll read palms in a parking lot. People are afraid of themselves everywhere. But her hand had gone to the ring again, and Maggie saw it. And Maggie, mercifully once in her life, said nothing. Because the truth was, the table was the last standing piece of a woman Nora had lost the winter before last, and she measured her whole year by the 12 nights it stood upright in this field.
Her grandmother, Lucette, had come off a boat as a girl, with nothing but a deck of soft cards and a way of looking at your hands that made you confess things to yourself. She had raised Nora between the cards and the sugar tin, taught her that a palm was just a face people forgot to guard, and told her exactly once, near the end, the only fortune she ever refused to explain. You read everyone's hand but your own, my girl. One day, someone's going to turn yours over, and you won't be able to stop him. Nora had laughed it off. She still laughed it off. She simply never, ever read her own palm. And if you asked her why, she'd tell you fortune-tellers who believed their own act ended up broke and lonely, and she changed the subject so smoothly you wouldn't notice the door closing. Next, she called, because a shape had stopped at the edge of her table, and calling next was easier than answering Maggie. It was only a kid wanting to know if he'd make the swim team. She told him his hands were a swimmer's hands, which was true. They were pruned from the dunk tank, and that the team would be lucky, and sent him off grinning without taking his crumpled dollar. Then a pair of girls giggling over a boy. Then a tired grandmother who wanted to hear that her garden would come back after the drought, and got told, gently, that gardens always did. They just made you wait until you'd nearly given up. The tin filled a little. The lights came on for real as the blue drained out of the sky, and the field turned gold and gaudy and kind. And in the lulls between hands, the way she had every night of this fair, Nora thought about last summer and the scar. It had been the final night, the tear-down night, when the rides went dark one by one, and the vendors counted their tins by phone light. She'd been packing the table, arms aching, the sugar jar nearly full for once, when a man had folded himself into the chair across from her without asking.
Late 30s, maybe. A good jacket worn like an apology. Expensive shoes gone grey with dust. He had the stillness of a man who was never told no, and the eyes of a man who wished, just once, someone would. You're closed, he'd said, not a question. I'm closed. She'd kept packing. Come back next year. I won't be here next year. He'd said it flatly, the way people say things they've decided are facts. I came to sell the last thing my family owned in this town, and I'm doing it in the morning, and then I'm never coming back to this coast again. I saw your sign. A muscle had moved in his jaw. What my hands already know. I'd like to know what my hands already know. I'll pay whatever the jar's short. She should have said no. She was tired, and the man had the look of someone who broke things by holding them. But there'd been a crack in his voice on the word family, a hairline fracture in all that certainty, and Nora had never once in her life been able to walk past a fracture. She'd set down the table leg and held out her hand. It's tips as the spirit moves you, she'd said. The spirit doesn't take cards. He'd put his hand in hers, palm up. And that was when she saw the scar. A pale seam straight across the base of his fingers. Old. The kind of mark a rope leaves, or a blade you grabbed the wrong end of. His hand was warm and heavy, and it did not know how to lie still in another person's hand. She turned it toward the last working string of lights, and she had done the thing she never did with strangers. She told him the truth, all the way down. You already have everything you're ever going to buy, she'd said. That's what this is. See how the headline runs so long and so straight and just plows through everything? You're good at getting.
You got so good at getting that you stopped being able to tell the difference between a thing you wanted and a thing you were just able to have. He'd started to pull back and she'd held on, gentle, the way you hold a spooked animal. I'm not finished. Here's your heart line. It's not weak. Everybody who comes to a table like mine is scared theirs is weak. Yours isn't weak. It's walled. Something happened, and you decided wanting things out loud was for people who could afford to lose. So you only ever want quietly, where it can't cost you. The man had gone very still. The carousel had stopped somewhere behind them, and in the sudden quiet, she'd heard him breathe. And, he'd said,
Rough. The future. That's the part I'm paying for. This was where she should have given him the pretty lie. Instead, she'd looked at the scar, and the long straight line that ploughed through everything, and the wall around the heart. And she told him the last prediction she ever gave that summer, the one that kept her awake. You're going to lose the thing you came here to sell, she'd said. Not tomorrow. But you're going to find out too late that it was the only thing you had that couldn't be bought. And the day you understand that, you'll come back to this exact field to get it, and it won't be for sale. And that's the day your life actually starts. She'd let his hand go. That's not a fortune. That's a warning. Keep your money. He'd sat there a long moment, the fair going dark around them, his scarred hand still open on the table, as if he'd forgotten it belonged to him. Then he'd taken a card from his jacket, not to pay, just holding it, turning it in the light so she never saw the name. You don't know what you're talking about, he'd said, and his voice had cracked clean down the middle. But you talk like someone who does. Then he'd stood and put a folded bill in the jar without looking at it, and walked off into the dark toward the parking field. She'd found the bill later, counting by phone light. 100. And under it, at the very bottom of the tin, the card he'd changed his mind about leaving after all. Face down, no name, just 11 words in hard black ink on the back. You're wrong. I'll prove it to you. Ask me next summer. The corner torn where he'd meant to write something more. She'd nearly thrown it out a dozen times. She never did. It lived in the sugar tin under the felt lining, and every night of this new fair, she'd caught herself checking that it was still there, and hating that she checked. You're doing the thing, Maggie said now from her stand, hauling Nora back into the loud gold present. The staring thing. You get a face like a woman who left the stove on a year ago. I'm resting my eyes. You're resting them on 1996. Maggie squinted past her toward the midway. Also, either the mayor died and left you money, or that man's coming to your table, and he does not look like a $2 palm. Nora turned. He was crossing the midway against the flow of the crowd, and the crowd, this was the thing she'd remember, the crowd moved for him without knowing why. Not a big man, but he came through the sticky, laughing caramel corn river of the fair like a keel through water, parting it, and people glanced up from their funnel cakes and stepped aside and didn't know they'd done it. The string lights caught the good gray of a summer suit worn without a tie, the kind of quiet cloth that costs more than Maggie's truck, no security that she could see, and yet a space traveled around him the way space travels around the dangerous or the very rich. It took her a full 5 seconds because the dust and the apology were gone, and the certainty had hardened into something with edges. Then he stepped into the throw of her string lights, and she saw the scar. Her whole body went cold in the June heat. You're closed, he said. The same 2 words. But he said them softer this time, testing them, and the corner of his mouth moved like a man who has rehearsed a line in the car and heard how it sounds only now, out loud. Her voice failed, and she despised it for failing. She started again, tucking the curl behind her ear, turning the brass ring. I'm never closed to paying customers.
Tips as the spirit moves you. I know. He didn't sit.
He stood at the edge of her table with his scarred hand loose at his side, and up close she could see what a year had done. The good suit couldn't hide that he'd gone thinner, sharper, that something had been sanded off him, and something else laid bare. You told me to ask you next summer. It's next summer. Behind him, Maggie had gone still with her paring knife in the air, and two teenagers waiting for palms drifted off, sensing weather. The carousel waltzed on, oblivious. I told a stranger a lot of things last summer, Nora said carefully. I was tired. I say too much when I'm tired. You said I'd lose the only thing I had that couldn't be bought. He set something on her table then, deliberately, and slid it across the vinyl cloth into the throw of her lights. A card, heavy, cream, the kind that announces a person before they open their mouth. She didn't touch it. She read it upside down, which was a skill you learned reading palms across a table your whole life. Julian Ashford. And beneath it, the name of a company she knew, the way everyone knew it, the way you knew the logo on half the ships in the harbor, and the tower downtown with his family's name cut into the granite over the door. A name worth more zeros than she'd made in her life. The Ashford who was buying the fairground. The developer. Harbor Point with its untouchable fountain. You, Nora said, and it came out like a door closing. You're the one buying the field. I bought the field. Present perfect. Done. He watched her face take the blow and, to his credit, didn't look away from it. Last summer, I came to sell the last thing my family kept on this coast. A piece of land my grandfather couldn't stand to look at and couldn't stand to let go of. This field. I sold it in the morning, like I told you I would, to a fund, clean, and I got on a plane, and I did not come back to this coast for a year. His jaw worked. And you were right. About all of it. Every word. I found out too late that it was the only thing I had that money couldn't get me back. Because the fund wouldn't sell it to me at any number. And I've offered them numbers that would make you sit down. Then you didn't make it true, Nora said. And her heart was slamming. And she couldn't have said whether it was fear or something worse. You proved me right. You lost it. I bought the fund. Julian Ashford said it the way another man would say, I bought a coffee. It took 11 months, and it cost me more than the land is worth by a factor I'm embarrassed to tell a woman who reads palms for tips. But I own this field again as of Tuesday, which means the fair keeps standing. He let that land. Let her feel the thing she'd been dreading all evening turn over in the air and become, impossibly, a reprieve. I read the room, Miss Bellamy. I know what they're saying at the lemonade stand. Down the row, Maggie put the knife down without a sound.
So there's your problem solved, Nora said, and hated how her voice shook. You didn't come 3,000 miles and buy a fund to save a fairground for strangers. Say the rest of it. Something moved behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she'd cut straight to the wall she'd read on him a year ago. He reached into his jacket and took out a second thing and set it beside his card on the vinyl. A photograph, worn soft at the corners from a year of being carried, the underside of a sugar tin, and a face-down card, and 11 words in his own hard black ink. He'd photographed it. He'd kept the image of the thing he'd left her. You gave me one prediction I couldn't buy my way out of, and one I could, he said. I've spent a year and most of my pride on the one I could. I came back for the other one. He looked at her hand where it turned the brass ring, and then, for the first time, he looked uncertain. A billionaire on the wrong side of a $2 table, out of things that money moves. You told me the day I understood the field was the day my life actually started. It's Tuesday. The field is mine. And nothing started. His voice dropped. Nothing started, Miss Bellamy. I did everything you said, and I'm standing in the exact field, and I feel exactly as I did. Except now I know the shape of what I'm missing, which is worse. So I'm asking you the way you told me to ask. He set his scarred hand, palm up, on the table, open, offered,
the old seam pale in the gold light. Read it again. Tell me what I do now, and this time I'll pay whatever it takes to make the last prediction true. Because I've decided the last prediction was about you. The whole fair seemed to hold its breath. The caramel and the diesel and the salt, the wheeze of the carousel, Maggie frozen mid-pour, the string lights buzzing overhead. Nora looked down at the open hand she had promised herself. For one entire year, she would never touch again. And her grandmother's voice came up out of the dark of 2 winters gone, clear as the bell on the midway. One day, someone's going to turn yours over, and you won't be able to stop him. I don't read the same hand twice, Nora heard herself say. It was the last lie she'd managed to tell him cleanly, and they both seemed to know it. His scarred palm stayed open on her table, patient as a debt, and she realized her own hand had already begun, against every promise she'd ever made, to reach. Her fingers closed the last inch of air, and then she stopped them, flat against the vinyl, a breath from his skin, close enough that the warmth came off his palm, and she could smell the day on him. Clean cotton, cedar, the ghost of a plane cabin, the whole expensive climate of a man who had crossed a country to sit here. She did not take his hand. She laid her own beside it, palm down, a woman refusing a door she had already opened. No, Nora said. Julian's jaw moved. No, you won't read it, or no. You don't get to hand me a prediction and a checkbook in the same breath and call it romance. She heard her voice steady itself, the way it did over strangers, and she leaned on it. You want to know what I read on you the second you crossed the midway? Same thing I read last year. You've decided something, and now you're arranging the world until it agrees with you. You decided the field would make your life start. You bought the field. It didn't start. So now you've decided I'm the missing piece, and you're going to buy me too. And when I light up, you'll cross me off the list and finally feel the thing you've been trying to feel. She sat back. That's not a heart line, Mr. Ashford. That's a purchase order, with feelings drawn on it. For a moment he said nothing. The carousel wheezed to the end of its waltz behind them, and the sudden hush let in the smaller sounds. The tick of the string lights, the fat sizzle from Maggie's fryer, a gull complaining down toward the black water. That's fair, he said at last, quietly. That's more fair than I'd like. I'm always fair. I'm only never kind. She turned the brass ring. It's the tips. Then read me and prove me wrong. He didn't move his hand. You said you never read the same palm twice. You've said a lot of things you meant right up until you didn't. If I'm a purchase order, tell me. Look at the line and tell me I can't feel anything, and I'll get up and leave the field to you and the funnel cakes, and never darken your table again. But look first. The corner of his mouth did the rehearsed thing again, and failed at it, and became real. You're a woman who can't walk past a fracture. You told me that with your own eyes a year ago, before you told me anything else. I've been counting on it the whole flight. She hated that he'd learned her. She hated more that it had taken him only 2 meetings, when there were people in this town who'd known her 30 years and still thought she was a girl with a card table. Sit down then, Nora said. You're blocking my light and scaring off the paying ones. He sat. The folding chair, which had held 1,000 nervous strangers, took him without a sound, and she turned his scarred hand toward the string of bulbs the way she had that last dark night. And this time, the fare was loud and gold around them instead of going out. And somehow that was worse, because now there were witnesses. "You cut this on a rope," she said, before she meant to, her thumb hovering over the pale seam. "Not glass. A rope, pulled fast when you were young. You were holding on to something you should have let run." Julian went very still. "A boat line. I was 14. The tender got away from the dock in a squall, and He stopped. "I didn't let it run." "I know. It's written right here, how you didn't." She moved on before the thing in his face could finish surfacing. Because a hand was a face people forgot to guard, and she just watched him forget. "This is the same headline. Long, straight, plows through. And here's your wall." Her fingertip traced the heart line without landing. "But it's got a crack in it now that wasn't here last year. Something got through the wall. That's not me flattering you. Cracks in a wall aren't good news, Mr. Ashford. They mean water's coming in, and you can't choose where." "Julian," he said. "I read surnames. It keeps the table honest." "Nothing about this table is honest," he said. "And it should have been cruel. And instead it came out like a man marveling. And it's the truest thing that's happened to me in a year." Maggie chose that moment to arrive with 2 paper cups of lemonade she had not been asked for, setting them down on the vinyl with the flat authority of a woman reclaiming her own field. "On the house," she announced to Julian, "because I want it on record that the man who owns the ground I stand on drank my lemonade before he raised my rent." She fixed him with 40 summers of squint. "You do plan to raise my rent?" "I hadn't planned anything about your rent, Mrs. "Maggie. Just Maggie. There's no Mr. There hasn't been since the Ferris wheel had wooden seats. And I like it that way." She jerked her chin at the cup. "Drink. It's mostly sugar and spite, same as the fortune teller." Julian looked at the cup, then, gravely, picked it up and drank. Something in his shoulders came down 1/2 inch. "It's very good," he said, and sounded surprised to find he meant it. And Maggie made a noise like a woman who had won an argument nobody had started, and retreated to her stand, satisfied. "She likes you," Nora said. "Don't get comfortable. She likes the ice cream man too, and she overcharges him blind." "You're stalling." He turned his hand a little, the offer still open. "You read the scar and the wall and the crack. You haven't read the part I came for." She had, though. She'd been reading it the whole time and hiding from it, the way she hid from her own. Because the crack in the walled heart ran toward the headline, and where they met, there was a thing she'd seen on maybe 3 hands in her life. A man who had finally, catastrophically, let himself want something out loud, and had no idea yet what it was going to cost him, only that it already had. She could have told him the pretty version. She looked at the harbour lights strung across the dark water past the parking field and felt her grandmother's ring bite into her knuckle. And she gave him the true one instead, because that was the only trick she had. "The field was never the thing," Nora said. "You knew that on the plane. The field was the excuse your pride would accept for coming back to a place you swore off. You don't want the ground. You want to be a person who wanted something and reached for it before he could talk himself out of it. You've spent your whole life wanting quietly where it couldn't cost you." She let go of his hand and folded hers in her lap. "And now you've wanted something loud, in front of a lemonade stand. And it's the most frightened I've ever seen a rich man look. There, that's your reading. That'll be tips as the spirit moves you, and the spirit says you can't afford me." He laughed. It was a startled, cracked open sound, and it turned 3 heads at the caramel corn cart, and she understood with a lurch that it was probably a sound he hadn't made in a long while, because it came out rusty, like a hinge learning the trick of itself again. "There she is," Julian said. "I flew 3,000 miles for that laugh line. Do you understand? I have people who cry when I walk into a room, and I flew across the country because a woman at a card table told me I couldn't afford her." He reached into his jacket. "I want to hire you." And there it was, the door closing. She watched her own face do the thing his had done a minute before, forget to guard itself, and she snatched it back too late.
"Get out of my chair." "Not like—" He stopped, recalibrated, and she watched the deal maker in him take the wheel and hated that she could see the exact machinery. "The fair's got 12 nights. I own the field, but I don't know the field. I don't know which vendors have paper and which ones have a handshake from 1980. I don't know what the town needs from this ground, so it doesn't come after me with a petition. I don't know a single true thing about this place, except that you're the only person in it who's told me a true thing twice. Consult for me. 12 nights. Walk me through what saving this actually costs. Name a number a woman who reads palms for tips would never say out loud, and then double it, because it'll offend me if you go low." "You want to pay me?" Nora said slowly.
"To tell you the truth, about your own field. I want to pay you to stay at this table long enough that I stop being a customer." His voice dropped under the fair noise, so only she caught it. "I don't know how to be around a person any other way, Miss Bellamy. Money is the only language I ever got fluent in. I'm asking you to teach me a second one, and I'm offering to pay for the lessons, because it's the only way I know to say I'm serious. If that's grotesque, tell me it's grotesque. You're the one person who will." It was grotesque. It was also, she thought, the most naked thing anyone had said across this table in 20 years, and her grandmother would have taken his money and taught him nothing and let him figure it out. And Nora was not her grandmother, which was the whole trouble. "I'll think about it," she said, which was a surrender wearing a delay's clothes, and they both heard it. That was when the phone in his jacket buzzed. She felt it against the table more than heard it, and he ignored it, and it stopped, and started again immediately, that particular double insistence of a call that will not be sent to the dark. A muscle ticked at his temple. On the third assault, he drew it out, glanced at the screen, and something happened to his face that she filed away without meaning to. The wall she'd read on his hand came up behind his eyes, fast and total, a portcullis dropping. "I have to take this," he said, standing, already turning toward the quiet at the edge of the string lights. "Don't leave. Whatever the tin says tonight, I'll cover it. Just stay at the table." He walked 10 steps into the half-dark by the generator truck and put the phone to his ear. And Nora, who had spent her life reading the parts of people they thought no one could see, watched his free hand go flat against the truck's cold flank, as if he needed the metal to hold him up, and heard, under the carousel and the fryer and the barker promising everyone a winner, 3 words in a voice gone low and hard: "Not selling it back." Maggie appeared at her shoulder with a rag she wasn't using. "Well," she said, "that's a man on the phone with someone who signs his checks or shares his name. Only 2 kinds of people make a face like that." "How do you know it's not both?" "Because," Maggie said, "here comes the both." Nora followed her gaze past the Ferris wheel to where the crowd, which had parted so easily for Julian, was parting again, but wrongly this time, resentfully, the way a river shoulders around a rock it doesn't like. A woman came through it in a way that cost the crowd something. She was younger than Julian, close enough in the face that the blood was unmistakable, dressed in the kind of pale summer sheath that did not belong within a mile of fried dough, and had clearly been chosen precisely so. And she walked with a phone still glowing in her hand, as though she had dialed her brother from the parking field just to watch him fail to answer in real time. She reached the edge of Nora's lights and stopped, and looked at the folding table, and the sugar tin, and the hand-lettered sign, and Nora behind it, and her mouth curved into something that had been taught to pass for a smile at a great many functions. "Oh," the woman said, "it's worse than the photograph." "We're closed," Maggie said instantly, though they weren't and never were. "I'm not here for my fortune. I know my fortune." The woman's eyes came to Nora's and stayed, cool and grey, and entirely without cruelty, which was somehow more frightening than cruelty. "Camille Ashford, Julian's sister, the one who was on the phone he just walked away from? Which means you've already gathered we don't agree about the interesting things." She glanced at the sugar tin. "May I?" "It's a free field," Nora said, "for 12 more nights. For considerably longer than that, if I have anything to say, which I do." Camille didn't sit. She rested 2 fingers on the back of Julian's abandoned chair, warm from him still, and looked at it with a distaste she didn't bother hiding. "Do you know what my brother has done, Miss Bellamy? I assume he told you the heroic version. He liquidated a position that took our grandfather 40 years to build, over 11 months, in secret, against the explicit advice of every person our family pays to keep it from doing exactly this, in order to buy back a strip of coastal dirt worth a fraction of what he spent. And the only reason any of us can find, the only thread we can pull, leads to a card table and a woman who reads palms for tips." She let that sit in the caramel air. "So you'll forgive me for wanting a look at the thread?" "He came to me," Nora said. "I didn't go 3,000 miles for anyone." "No, you waited here. That's cheaper and it works better." Camille tilted her head. "You're not what I expected. I expected, I don't know, scarves. You look like a woman who does her own taxes." "I do my own everything. Is there a question inside the tour?" Something flickered across Camille's face, quick and grudging, that might in another life have been the start of respect, and here was only reassessment. The look of a chess player who has just been shown the board is not the board she was playing. Down the row, Maggie had gone still with the rag, and past Camille's shoulder, Nora could see Julian by the generator truck, phone lowered now, watching his sister find his table, starting toward them with the walk of a man arriving too late at a fire. "One question," Camille said, and dropped her voice so that Julian, closing the distance, wouldn't catch it in time. "Did he tell you why our grandfather couldn't sell this field all those years, when he couldn't stand the sight of it either?" The question went in like a splinter. "He said he couldn't stand to look at it and couldn't stand to let it go," Nora said. "That's all. That's all he knows." Camille's gray eyes did something complicated. "It isn't all there is. Ask him about the summer of the fair, Miss Bellamy. Ask him what our grandfather came here for the last year he could walk, and who he came looking for, and why he'd sit in the parking field in the car until dark and not go in. My brother doesn't know. Our grandfather told exactly one person, and it wasn't family." She straightened as Julian came into the light. "But your grandmother might have. Bellamy. The sign's been up 20 years. It says so right there in the little letters. There was a Bellamy at this fair a long time before you." The whole midway seemed to tilt. Nora's hand went to the brass ring and stopped there, cold. "Camille." Julian's voice arrived a half-second before he did, flat and dangerous. "You flew commercial to ambush a fortune-teller. That's a new low even for the family." "I flew commercial to stop my brother from setting 40 years on fire for a stranger, and I'll do worse than a card table before I'm finished." Camille didn't so much as turn to him. She was still watching Nora's face, reading it the way Nora read palms, and finding whatever she'd come to find written plainly there. She didn't know, Camille said, softly, almost to herself. Look at that. You didn't know either. She stepped back from the chair. Well, now there are two of you standing in a field you don't understand. At least I know what I'm burning. That's enough, Julian said. It's nowhere near enough. For the first time, Camille looked at her brother directly, and Nora saw, under the ice, the thing she'd have charged a stranger $10 to hear named. A younger sister who had watched her brother go quiet and careful and unreachable for years, and had built her whole self around holding the family steady while he did it, and who did not have the first idea what to do now that he'd cracked open in front of a lemonade stand instead of in front of her. You want to know your future, Julian? Here it is, for free. There's a filing on Monday. The fund transfer isn't final until it clears the trust, and the trust needs 2 signatures, and you have 1. She held up her glowing phone like a small, cold moon. I'm the other. I have until Monday to decide whether my brother is having an awakening or a breakdown. And so far the only evidence I've got is a woman who told you a fortune and then a field fell into your lap. She slid the phone into her bag. Convince me by Monday, or the field goes back to the fund. The fair gets its last 3 summers after all, and you can come read palms beside her when it's gone. I'll be at the hotel, the good one, if this town has one. She turned and went back into the crowd, and the crowd closed behind her grudgingly, and the string lights buzzed, and somewhere the barker cried that everyone was a winner. Julian stood over his own abandoned chair, with the look of a man who has come home to find the locks changed. I'm sorry, he said. She's not. That's not who she is. That's who she is when she's scared. She's not wrong to be. Nora's voice came out from very far away. Her mind was 3 sentences back, standing in a parking field in the dark beside a car that wouldn't go in. There was a Bellamy at this fair a long time before you. 20 summers before, in smaller letters, her grandmother had painted with her own hand. Tips as the spirit moves you. Julian, what she said about your grandfather, the summer of the fair. His face closed the way it had on the phone, the portcullis dropping, and she watched him not know and hate not knowing. It's family noise. My grandfather kept this field for a reason he took with him, and Camille spent her whole life certain the reason is a wound she can press. There's nothing here but old money and old silence. But his scarred hand had gone flat on the back of the chair, the same way it had gone flat against the cold metal of the truck, a man steadying himself on a fact that had shifted. Why? What did she say to you? You've gone the color of the tablecloth. Nora looked at her sign. She looked at the sugar tin and thought of the card face down under the felt lining. 11 words in hard black ink. And beneath that thought, older and colder, her grandmother near the end saying the one fortune she never explained. You read everyone's hand but your own. And Nora had always heard it as a warning about love, about the man who'd turn her palm over. And only now, with a stranger's sister's splinter working under her skin, did she wonder for the first time whether her grandmother had been warning her about something that started long before Julian Ashford crossed a midway. Whether the last prediction she'd given him last summer, the one that kept her awake, had never been hers to give at all. Whether she'd handed a stranger a fortune that belonged to a car in a dark parking field 20 years gone, and hadn't known she was only reading it out loud. She said your grandfather came here looking for someone, Nora heard herself say. The last year he could walk, and that he told exactly one person why, and it wasn't your family. She made herself meet his eyes. My grandmother's name is on that sign, Julian. She ran this table before me. She came off a boat as a girl with a deck of cards, and she read palms in this exact field for 40 summers. And she's been gone 2 winters, and there's no one left to ask what she knew. Her hand found the ring and turned it once. So, before you spend the rest of your family's 40 years convincing your sister you're not out of your mind, you might want to be sure which of us you actually came back for. Because I don't think either of us knows yet. And I've got a very bad feeling your grandfather already did. The carousel began its waltz again behind them, bright and tinny and indifferent, and Julian Ashford looked at the little painted letters on the sign, as though the ground he'd spent a fortune to stand on had just tilted under both their feet, and for the length of one held breath, neither of them reached for anything at all. The waltz ran down and started up again before either of them moved, and it was Nora who broke first, because sitting still with a truth this large in the air was a thing she'd never been able to do. 12 nights, she said. You want to hire the truth for 12 nights. Fine. Here are my terms, and they're not negotiable, so save the face you make when someone says a number. She folded the photograph of her own sugar tin back across the table toward him. I don't take a check. You pay the table its tips like everyone else, and you pay Maggie's rent flat for the season, so she stops sharpening that knife at you. And you don't ask me one question about your grandfather until I've asked my grandmother mine, which is going to be difficult, seeing as she's been gone 2 winters and left me a deck of cards and a box I've never had the stomach to open. Julian sat back down without being told to. The folding chair took him the way it had taken 1,000 strangers, and something in his face had changed. The deal-maker had gone quiet, and what was left looked younger and less sure. You've never opened it. I open other people's hands for a living. My own family I leave shut. She heard how it sounded and didn't soften it. Your sister put a splinter in me, Mr. Ashford. There was an Ashford in this field before either of us could walk, and my grandmother knew something, and she carried it out the way she carried everything, smiling, and telling you nothing, and turning her ring. Nora looked down at the thin brass on her own finger. I'm going to open the box. Not because you paid me. Because Camille said my grandmother's name like it was a card she'd been holding. And I will not be the last person at this table to know what she meant. Then I'll help you open it. You'll wait outside the door and drink Maggie's lemonade until I call you. She stood and began the old ritual of tearing down. The sign first, the sugar tin lidded, the folding legs. Fractures, remember, I can't walk past one. But that box is mine, and I get first look. And if it says something I can't live with, you're going to find out I read strangers a great deal more kindly than I read myself. Maggie appeared with the cash apron already off and the stand shuttered, moving with the flat efficiency of a woman who had closed this field 40 times. He's staying? She asked Nora, jerking her chin at Julian. He's consulting. That's a rich word for a man sitting in a folding chair. But Maggie handed Julian the second lemonade cup, the one he hadn't finished, and fixed him with a look that had outlasted 3 developers and a hurricane. You break that girl's routine, you buy the whole fare a new one. She measures her year in these 12 nights. You touch the 12 nights, I touch you. She hoisted her cooler. Rent flat for the season, she said. I heard it. There's a witness now. Gull, probably, but a witness. Understood, Julian said. And there it was, the corner of his mouth doing the almost thing, the rehearsed line that came out real. I've been threatened in 7 countries, Maggie. Yours is the first one I believe. Maggie considered that, decided it was acceptable currency, and walked off toward the parking field with her cooler banging her hip. And if Nora hadn't been watching, she'd have missed the small, unwilling curve at the edge of Maggie's mouth. That was the trouble with the man. He found the hinge in people. He'd found hers in the dark a year ago, and she'd been checking that it was still latched ever since. She snapped the last table leg flat and did not let herself look at his scarred hand, open again on the vinyl, waiting. The box had lived under Nora's bed for 2 winters because that was the farthest from her heart she could put it and still keep it in the house. It was a sea chest the size of a bread box, salt-silvered wood, a brass clasp gone green, and it smelled, when she finally worked the lid up, kneeling on her own floorboards with the window open to the warm dark and the far wart-beat of the carousel 3 streets away, of cedar and camphor and something older underneath. The particular dust of a life packed by careful hands. Julian sat where she'd put him, on the top step of her back porch, on the wrong side of the screen door, a cup of Maggie's lemonade sweating in his hand, and the June night full of crickets and the tin smell of the harbour. She'd said outside, and he'd taken it literally, and she found she liked him better for the literalness than she would have for any grand gesture. "There are cards," she called through the screen, and heard the ice shift in his cup as he leaned toward her voice. "The soft ones. She never let a customer breathe on these." She fanned them, worn to cloth at the corners, the pips faded to the colour of weak tea. Under them, a rosary she'd never seen her grandmother pray, a child's hair ribbon, coiled and pinned to a card that read, "Only a happy day," tucked away for exactly what it was. A good afternoon somebody had chosen to keep. And under that, a bundle of letters bound in kitchen string. Nora's hands stopped. The top envelope had no stamp and no address. Only a name in a hand that was not her grandmother's. A hard, black, forward-leaning hand she had seen exactly once before, on the back of a card at the bottom of a sugar tin. She sat back on her heels so fast the floor took her weight badly. "Julian." Her voice came out wrong. "What did your grandfather's writing look like?" Through the screen, she heard him go still, the cup lowering. "Black ink. He pressed too hard, went through 3 pens a month my grandmother used to." He stopped. "Why?" She turned the envelope to the window light. "Lucette Bellamy," it said, and under it, smaller, "At the Harbour Light Fair, where the truth is cheaper than everywhere else." Nora put her thumb to the words, the way she put it to a stranger's palm, hovering, not quite landing, as though the ink might read her back. "Come inside," she heard herself say. "Bring your ridiculous lemonade. I've changed the terms. You get first look with me, because I don't think I can do this one alone, and I will deny I ever said it." The screen door sighed, and he came, folding himself down onto the floorboards across the open chest from her, the way he'd folded into her chair a year ago. And the harbour breathed through the window, and between them the string of letters lay like a fuse. There were 11 of them. They counted without meaning to, and both heard the number land, and neither said it. Nora read the first one aloud, because reading aloud was the only way she knew how to hold the thing at arm's length. It was dated a summer, 22 years gone, and it was not a love letter, which was somehow worse, because a love letter she could have dismissed. It was a man arguing with a woman about whether he was allowed to be happy. "You told me my hand said I would spend my life getting, and never once keeping," Nora read, and her own voice snagged on the words, because she had said the same to this man's grandson at this same table, with no idea she was quoting anyone. "You told me the field would be the truest thing I ever bought, and I would only understand that when it was too late to enjoy it. I have decided you are wrong, Lucette. I have decided to prove it. Ask me next summer." The lemonade cup stopped halfway to Julian's mouth. "Say that again," he said, very low. "Ask me next summer." She looked up. His face had gone the grey of the tablecloth, the exact shade she'd worn an hour ago when Camille slid the splinter in. "Julian, what?" He set the cup down on her floorboards with the care of a man setting down something that might go off. He reached into his jacket, the same motion he'd made across her table, the card, the photograph.
And this time he drew out a single folded sheet of heavy cream paper, worn soft at the folds from the year of being carried. And he did not slide it across to her the way he'd slid his business card. He held it in both hands and looked at it as if it had betrayed him.
"This came to me the week after the funeral," he said. 14 months ago. From the estate. Sealed, my name on it, in that same black ink. His thumb moved over the fold the way it moved over the scar. "It says, I know it by heart. I've read it more times than I've read anything. It says, go to the Harbour Light Fair before you sell the field. Find the Bellamy woman at the card table. Ask her to read your hand. Do not tell her who you are. And when she gives you the fortune, believe it, because it is the only true thing I was ever given, and I was too proud to keep it." He finally looked up, and the wall was gone from his eyes, and what was behind it was nothing she wanted to see on a person. "I went last summer because a letter told me to, not because of your sign." The crickets went on. The carousel turned 3 streets away. Nora sat very still on her own floor, with her grandmother's letters in her lap, and felt the ground she'd spent a year standing on tilt for the second time in an hour. "You knew," she said, "when I read you last summer, when I gave you the last prediction, the one that's kept me awake for a year. You already knew the shape of it. You sat there and let me think I'd pulled it out of the air. I didn't know you'd say it word for word." His voice cracked down the middle, the way it had a year ago, and she hated that she still recognized the sound. "Nora, I swear to you I did not know. You never told me what the fortune was, only that there was one, and that I'd know it when I heard it. And then I sat down at a card table to make fun of a letter from a proud man who was gone, and a woman I'd never met turned my hand over and said my grandfather's whole life back to me in her own voice, and I—" He stopped. His scarred hand had gone flat on her floorboards. "I couldn't breathe. I put $100 in your tin, and I wrote you 11 words that were his 11 words, because I didn't have any of my own. And I got on a plane, and I have not had a full night's rest since." Nora looked down at the letter in her lap, at the hard black hand, at "Ask me next summer," written 22 years before she was old enough to hold a deck of cards. "That's why you came back," she said slowly. The warmth she'd let herself feel all evening was draining out of her, cold from the feet up. "Not for my fortune, for his. I'm not the woman who told you something true, Julian. I'm the woman who happens to have the right last name. You came 3,000 miles for a Bellamy at a card table because a letter told you to. And I was just—" Her hand found the ring. "I was just the one who was here." "No." He said it fast. Too fast. A man who has run this argument in his own head at altitude and knows exactly where it goes wrong. "That's not. The letter sent me to a card table. It didn't tell me to fly back a year later. It didn't tell me to buy a fund I had no business buying. It didn't tell me to sit in Maggie's folding chair and drink sugar and spite and feel like a person for the first time since I was 14 years old, holding a rope I should have let run." His voice dropped so low, the crickets nearly took it. "The letter got me to your table once. You're the reason I couldn't stay away. Those aren't the same thing, and you know the difference better than anyone alive. It's the difference you charge $10 to name. A thing you were sent to do, and a thing you actually want." It was a good argument. It was, she thought, the best argument anyone had ever made across a distance of 3 feet of her own floor, and that was precisely why she couldn't trust it. Because he was a man who arranged the world until it agreed with him, and she had just watched him do it in real time, taking the worst fact he owned and turning it, deal-maker to the last, into a case for why she should feel chosen instead of used. "Give me the letter," she said. He hesitated. 1 full second, and she saw it and filed it. Then he put the cream sheet in her hand. She read it herself in the window light, and it was as he'd said, word for word, a proud man's last instruction to a grandson he didn't trust to feel anything. But at the bottom, below the signature, in a smaller, harder line that Julian had not quoted, there was a postscript, and Nora read it twice before she understood why he'd left it out. "She will pretend the reading is for a stranger," Nora read aloud, and her voice went flat and careful, the voice she used over the worst hands. "Let her. The Bellamy women only tell the truth to people they think they'll never see again. If she knew who you were, she would give you the kind fortune instead of the true one. And I have had a lifetime of kind fortunes, and they are worth exactly nothing." She lowered the letter. "You knew that too," she said. "You knew that if I found out who you were, I'd have lied to you. You knew it a year ago, and you knew it tonight, walking across that midway with your card in your pocket. You handed me your name at the top of the reading on purpose, didn't you? Not honesty. Strategy. You wanted to see whether I'd go kind." Her hands were steady now, the way they went steady over strangers, and she leaned on that steadiness because it was the last dry thing in the room. "Get out of my house, Julian. Take your grandfather's letter. Leave mine." "Nora, you want to know your fortune?" She stood, and the letters slid from her lap, and she didn't gather them. "Here it is for free, same as your sister gave me hers. You are going to spend the rest of your life unable to tell the difference between a person who tells you the truth and a person you've arranged into telling you the truth. And you did it to the one woman who'd have given it to you for a folded 10. That's not a heart line, Julian. That's the wall I read on you a year ago, and it's still there. And now I'm on the wrong side of it." He got up slowly, in stages, the way a much older man gets up, and he took his grandfather's letter from her hand, and at the screen door he stopped, with the June dark behind him, and the crickets loud, and the harbor, tin-sharp, in the air. "There are 10 more of hers," he said quietly, not turning around. "In the box. He kept 11 of yours in the estate, and she kept 11 of his in a sea chest, and neither of us has read what's in the middle. Camille's got until Monday. I've got a fund that unwinds if I don't get a second signature, and I've got a sister at the good hotel deciding whether I've lost my mind. And I have just lost the only thing I came back for, which was never the field." His scarred hand rose and pressed flat against the screen, the wire pushing pale lines into his palm. "You said the day I understood the field was the day my life would start. I understand it now. It started tonight, Nora. And it started with you throwing me out of your house, and I find that's exactly the kind of true thing my grandfather warned me I wouldn't be able to buy." The screen door sighed open under his hand. "Read the other 10. Not for me, for her. She was answering him for 22 summers, and somebody in this family should finally know what she said." Then he was gone down the porch steps into the dark, and the screen banged once behind him, and Nora stood alone in her grandmother's cedar and camphor, with 11 letters at her feet, in a hard black hand, and a stranger's name still warm on her tongue. She did not sleep. She read. She read them out of order, the way you read a hand, where your eye lands first, not where the story starts. And by the grey hour when the harbour gulls began to argue over the water, she had them spread across her floor in a fan, like the cards, and she understood the shape of a thing that had been standing behind her whole life, the way the fair stood behind Maggie's stand, so constant, you stopped seeing it. Her grandmother had read a man's palm at this table 30-odd summers ago and told him the truth all the way down, the way she'd taught Nora to, the way Nora had done to his grandson, without knowing the blood ran back. She had told a young Ashford heir that he would spend his life getting and never keeping, and he had spent 30 years proving her right, and 1 week each summer coming back to argue that she was wrong, never once telling his family where he went, sitting in the parking field in his car until the string lights came on, working up the nerve to walk into a fair and lose to a fortune-teller one more time. The field wasn't a wound the family couldn't understand. The field was the only place the proud man had ever let himself be read. And in the last letter, the one dated the summer before Nora's grandmother went grey and quiet and stopped setting up the table in the rain, there was a line that made Nora put her hand flat on the floor to steady the whole room.
"You were right about all of it, and I was too late,"
the young, then old Ashford had written. "And the only thing I can still do about being too late is make sure the field outlives me, so that when the next fool in my blood comes to sell it, there's still a Bellamy at a card table to turn his hand over and tell him the truth I couldn't take from you. Keep the fair standing, Lucette. I'll keep the field. Between us, we'll trap one of them into being happy." Nora sat with that until the light came up full and gold through her window and the crickets gave way to the day. Then the phone rang. Not Julian's number, a number she didn't know, local exchange, the good hotel's prefix. And Camille Ashford's cool voice came down the line before Nora had finished saying hello.
"You've been up all night," Camille said.
"So have I. I imagine my brother told you about the letter." "He did. Did he tell you there are two of them?" A pause, precise as a dealt card. "The estate sent one to Julian. It sent a different one to me. Mine has a name in it, Miss Bellamy. A name and a date and an instruction. And it is not the sentimental nonsense my brother's been carrying around like a hall pass." The line hummed.
Down at the harbour, a gull screamed, and the first ride of the day shuddered awake.
"I'm signing Monday, but not the way Julian thinks, and not for the reason he thinks. And before I do, I want you to come to the hotel and read one hand for me, for real, for a great deal more than tips. Because I've read the letter my grandfather actually left, and I don't think either of you knows what he came back to this field to do, or what he needs a Bellamy to sign to finish it." A cold, small breath. "Come alone. Don't tell Julian. And bring the box." The line went quiet, and Nora sat on her floor in the risen sun with 11 letters fanned around her like a fortune she hadn't asked to read, and understood that whichever hotel door she walked through next, there was no version of the morning where she got to keep standing where she stood. Nora did not call Julian. She called Maggie instead, which felt like a smaller betrayal and a larger comfort. And Maggie was on her porch inside 20 minutes in her one good blouse, with the truck idling like a horse that wanted running. "You look like a woman going to identify a body," Maggie said, which was not a thing anyone should say before coffee. And then, seeing Nora's face, softer, "Get in. I'll drive you as far as the lobby and no farther, because I have exactly one blouse without a mustard stain, and I'm not wearing it into a room with that woman in it. She'd find the stain that isn't there yet." The good hotel stood where the harbour road curved, all glass and pale stone, a fountain out front that nobody was allowed to touch. The June morning came off the water in sheets of white light, and inside, the cold hit Nora like a hand. That expensive, filtered chill that costs a fortune to make a summer feel like it never happened. She carried the sea chest against her hip.
It smelled of cedar and camphor in a lobby that smelled of lilies and money, and she was glad of it, the way you're glad of a friend at a funeral. "4th floor," said the man at the desk before she'd given a name. They were expecting her. Of course they were. The elevator opened onto a hush. Nora found the suite by the door left ajar, and she did not knock, because through the gap she saw a thing she was not meant to see. Camille Ashford stood at the window with her back to the door, and she was not the woman from the fair. The pale sheath was traded for a plain robe, her feet bare on the carpet, her hair down and undone, and in both hands she held a single sheet of heavy cream paper, and she was pressing it flat against the glass and smoothing it, once, again, again, the way you smooth a thing that will not lie down, the way you smooth a bed no one will sleep in. The harbor light came through the paper and through her hands, and showed how they shook. She lifted it and read a line Nora couldn't hear, and her shoulders came down. All of them. All the held weight of them. And for the length of one breath, the woman who signed her brother's checks looked like someone standing at the edge of a pier she'd been told not to go to. Nora steadied back from the gap. She waited in the hush by the elevator until she heard the paper stop moving. Then she knocked. When Camille opened the door, she was dressed and put together and cold, and only the corners of her eyes gave her away. And Nora let them. Because there were things you didn't charge a stranger for. You brought it. Camille's gaze went to the chest. Good. Sit. There's coffee. I've been up since 3 doing arithmetic I don't like the answer to. The suite was all one color, the color of money at rest, and the coffee was very good, and Nora didn't want it. She set the chest on the low glass table between them and did not open it. Camille sat across, folded her hands, and for a moment neither of them said the thing. Your grandfather loved my grandmother, Nora said, because sitting still with a truth this large in the air was a thing she had never been able to do. That's what's in the box. 22 summers of a proud man arguing with a card table because he couldn't stand there without a reason. And she gave him one, 12 nights a year, for the price of a tip he was never allowed to make bigger. That's your con, Miss Ashford. He tried to pay her a fortune once. She wrote back that the spirit didn't take checks. She heard her own voice, steady. Read her hand, you said. I've read yours already. You came here certain your family got fleeced by a woman with a deck of cards, because that's a wound you know how to press, and it's a great deal easier than the other thing. And what's the other thing? Not a question. Camille's chin was up. That he was happy at that table and nowhere else, and none of you could give him what a stranger gave him for free. And you've spent your whole life trying to be enough for a family that trained itself not to feel a thing. And now your brother's gone, and felt something in front of a lemonade stand, and you don't have a folder for it. Nora let it land, gentle, the way you land a truth on someone who'll bruise. You're not signing Monday to stop him, Camille. You're signing because if he gets to crack open, then all the years you spent holding steady were the years you weren't allowed to. The room was very quiet. Down at the harbor a ferry sounded, low and far. Camille's hand had gone to the arm of the chair, flat, pressing. Give me the box, she said, and it came out rougher than she'd have liked. She opened it herself, which Nora let her do. She lifted the soft cards without breathing on them. She knew then that Camille had read enough of the letters to know that rule, and under them, the rosary and the ribbon pinned to its card that read, "A happy day." And Camille's thumb stopped on those 2 small words a moment before she moved past them. Then the letters in kitchen string, and beside them, from her own bag, Camille laid a single cream sheet, the one from the window, the one that had shaken in her hands. He sent Julian the sentimental one, Camille said. Go to the fair, find the Bellamy, ask her to read your hand. Believe it. A hall pass for a boy who couldn't feel his own pulse. And he sent me the instructions because he knew which of us kept the machinery running. She turned the sheet so Nora could read it upside down, the skill of a lifetime across a card table. There's a name in it, and a date, and a thing he needed a Bellamy to sign, but he ran out of summers to arrange. Nora read it upside down, and the cold of the room went all the way into her. It was not a love letter, this one either. It was a man who had spent his whole life fluent in only one language, using it, at the end, to say the only true thing he had. The field was not to be sold. The field was to be conveyed, in trust, to Lucette Bellamy, and the fair kept standing on it in perpetuity, so that there would always be a Bellamy at a card table on that ground to turn over the hand of the next fool in his blood and tell him the truth the family had trained out of itself. The trust required 2 signatures to move, an Ashford trustee and the Bellamy the letter named, and under the name
a date. The spring he died, the spring after Lucette had gone. "He was too late," Nora said. Her voice came out flat and careful, the voice she kept for the worst hands. "He signed this to give her the field, and she'd already—" She stopped. She did not use the word. "She was already gone. The Bellamy he named couldn't sign because there was no Lucette to sign, and the whole thing—" lapsed. Camille said it the way you'd name a stone. The clause needed her acknowledgement inside a year of his passing. She predeceased him. So the field fell back into the sellable estate, and the lawyers did what lawyers do with sellable estate. And Julian, following his little sentimental letter, went to the fair, met you, and then sold the ground his grandfather spent a lifetime keeping, because nobody told him it was already promised away. Camille's mouth did something that wasn't a smile. "That's the arithmetic I've been doing since 3. My brother liquidated 40 years and bought back a field that our grandfather meant to give away for nothing. He spent a fortune to undo a gift." Nora sat with that. Out past the glass, the fountain threw its untouchable water at the white sky. In 3 streets over, though she couldn't hear it yet, the fair was shaking its rides awake for the day.
"You could tell him," Nora said. "You've had the answer since 3 in the morning. You could have told him at 4. Why am I here?"
"Because there's a second clause." Camille turned the letter over, and on the back, in the hard black hand pressed so deep it had furrowed the paper, were 4 more lines. "The trust can still be executed. The name isn't only Lucette. It says her heir. It says a Bellamy of the Harbour Light Fair." She looked up, and the ice had a crack in it now, the same crack Nora had traced on Julian's palm a night ago. "You can still sign, Miss Bellamy. If I sign as trustee and you sign as heir, the field goes into the trust exactly as he wanted it. The fair stands forever, and it belongs to no Ashford ever again. Not the fund, not Julian, not me. My grandfather's last real act finishes 22 years late." Her voice dropped. "And my brother loses the one thing he crossed a country and burned a fortune to hold. Willingly."
"If you make him, he'll sign it away and call it love, and I will have watched him give up the only proof he was ever right about anything, for a woman who threw him out of her house at midnight."
"So don't sign," Nora said. "Keep the field for him. Let him have his monument."
"I've considered it. For about an hour at 4. Camille smoothed the letter flat on the glass, once. The same gesture from the window, and Nora understood now what she'd witnessed and hadn't been meant to.
"But my grandfather sat in a parking field in a car until the string lights came on and could not make himself walk in, year after year, because he'd decided wanting a thing out loud was for people who could afford to lose it. And he was the richest man I ever knew, and he could not afford it. That's the family."
"Miss Bellamy, that's what I've been keeping steady. A house of people who can buy anything and can't reach for one thing." Her eyes came up wet and furious and clear.
"I am not going to sign the paper that lets my brother spend the rest of his life the way our grandfather spent his. I need to think about which is crueler, letting him keep the field or making him give it up. I have until Monday. Come to the fair Sunday, the last night, and bring your name. I'll have decided which of us I'm willing to be." She stood, which was a dismissal, and Nora stood too. And at the door, Camille said one more thing, not turning, the way her brother said his truest things. "You were right that I came to press a wound." A pause, precise as a dealt card. "I didn't know the wound was mine." Nora rode down through the filtered chill and out into the June furnace of the street, and the heat closed over her like the harbour closing over a stone. And she stood a moment on the untouchable fountain's rim, letting the sun undo the cold of the room before she went to find the one person she'd been told not to tell. Julian was not hard to find. He was where a man like him goes when the world tilts. He was at the field. She saw him from the top of the midway before the gates opened, before the Barker or the Friars, or the first sticky child of the day, in the flat gold morning light, with the ride still and the grass silver with dew. He stood at her folding table.
He had set it up himself, badly, one leg shorter than the rest so it rocked, and he'd propped the hand-lettered sign against nothing so it had fallen flat. What your hands already know, face up to the sky. And he was looking at it, with his hands in his pockets, like a man reading a headstone. The dew had soaked his good shoes through, and he didn't seem to have noticed. "You put the leg in wrong," Nora said. He turned, and the whole guarded architecture of him came down for a second before he got it back up, and she saw that he'd been up as long as his sister had. "Camille called you," he said. "Don't. I can see it. Don't tell me you weren't with her. Your shoes are wet the same as mine, and there's only one fountain in this town worth soaking a shoe on." He almost smiled and couldn't finish it. "She's going to block the signature. She thinks I've lost my mind." "She doesn't." Nora crossed the wet grass and crouched and turned the short leg true, and the table settled, level, the way it had settled under 1,000 strangers. She stood the sign back up. Then she straightened, and she gave him the truth all the way down, because it was the only trick she had, and he'd flown 3,000 miles to lose to it once already. "Julian, your grandfather never wanted you to sell the field. He never wanted you to buy it back either. He wanted to give it away." She watched it go in. She watched the dealmaker try to file it and fail. She told him the rest, standing at her own crooked table, with the dew coming through her sandals. The 2 letters, the sentimental one and the machinery one, Lucette named. The date last autumn, the clause that lapsed because a proud man ran out of summers a season too slow. She told him the field was promised to a card table before he was old enough to hold a rope in a squall. And she watched the thing she'd read on his palm a year ago, the wall around the heart, the crack running through it. She watched the water come in, and him unable to choose where. "He loved her," Julian said. Not a question either. The Ashfords didn't ask sincere questions. His sister had taught her that, though she'd meant it as an insult to him. All those summers he went to the coast on business. He sat in a parking field. His scarred hand went flat against the vinyl of the table, steadying on a fact that had shifted under him. "He sent me to you knowing exactly what you'd be, because he'd already lost the same argument at the same table, and he wanted one of us to lose it in time." His voice went down under the empty morning. "I thought I was being original. I thought I found you." "You found me the second time," Nora said, and heard herself give him back his own argument from her floorboards, and hated and didn't hate that she meant it. "The letter got you to the table once. Nobody sent you back. Camille will block it, to protect me." He said it slowly, testing the shape. "And she'd be right. If she signs it into the trust, the field goes to the fair forever, and I lose it. Everything I liquidated, every position it took him 40 years to build, gone, for a strip of dirt I don't even get to keep." She thinks that's the cruel outcome. He looked at Nora, and for the first time since he'd crossed the midway a night ago, there was nothing arranged in his face at all. "It isn't. The cruel outcome is I keep it. The cruel outcome is I win the field and stand on it exactly as I did Tuesday and feel exactly nothing, and prove him right about the whole blood of us, that we can buy the ground and never once stand on it as a person." He drew a breath that shook the way his sister's hands had shaken on the glass. "I want to give it away, Nora. I want to sign the field into the trust and lose it to the fair.
And I need you to understand that I decided that before you told me it was what he wanted. I decided it on your porch steps, drinking Maggie's spite. I just didn't have the paper yet. You'd give up the only proof you were ever right. I don't want to be right. Being right is what he was, in a car, in a parking field, until the string lights came on. His hand turned on the vinyl, palm up. The old pale seam bright in the morning. Offered the way he'd offered it a night ago. You said you don't tell people their future. You told me that with your own eyes before you told me anything. You said you tell them the thing they already decided and are too scared to hear in their own voice. And you say it in a fortune-teller's voice. And then it's permission. The corner of his mouth did the rehearsed thing, and this time it went all the way to real. So read your own hand for once. Or let me read it. Badly, wrong, whatever comes out. Because I think you've already decided. And I think you're the one person at this table who never once got to hear it in a voice she'd believe. The fair was silent around them, the rides not yet turning, the friars cold. A single gull working the empty midway for last night's dropped sugar. And Nora Bellamy, who had read 1,000 palms and never once her own, who had promised herself an entire year she would never touch this man's hand again, and touched it anyway, put her hand into his, palm up, and let him turn it over. Her grandmother's voice came up out of 2 winters gone, clear as the bell on the midway. One day someone's going to turn yours over, and you won't be able to stop him. Julian held her hand the way she'd taught a stranger to be held. Gentle. The way you hold a thing that startles. He tilted it toward the flat gold light, an old bit of her grandmother's theater he'd learned in one night watching her do it, and he looked at the lines he couldn't read with a seriousness that undid her. And he did not tell her her future. This one goes deep, and then it stops, he said, tracing a crease without landing, giving her back her own first reading of the day she never remembered giving. Like you keep starting things and slamming the door on yourself. You quit something. He looked up. Or you're about to. You've been about to for a year. You check the bottom of a sugar tin every night for a card you tell yourself you should throw out, and you hate that you check, and the reason you hate it is that you already know what you decided the night I left it there. You're not afraid of wanting this. You're afraid of being right about it. About me. And finding out I couldn't hold the line pulled fast any better than a rope in a squall. His thumb stopped over the small crack she'd never once let herself read in her own walled heart. That's a braver fear than the other one. And you already know which one you are. Enjoy the fair. Nora's eyes went bright and wet at the corners, the way 1,000 strangers had at this table. And she let them, because there were things you didn't charge yourself for either. You're terrible at this, she said, thick. You read the headline like it's the heartline. You'd starve. I have people who cry when I walk into a room, Julian said. And I flew across a country because a woman at a card table wouldn't. His hand closed around hers, the scar warm against her knuckles, over the thin brass of her grandmother's ring. Tell me it's grotesque. You're the one person who will. It's grotesque, Nora said, and leaned across her own crooked table and kissed him once, softly, in the empty gold morning, with the dew coming through her sandals, and the gull complaining, and the whole silent fair holding its breath. And it was not a purchase order, with feelings drawn on it. And they both knew, and neither said so, because the subtext of it was the only currency the table had ever taken. When she pulled back, his eyes were shut, and she watched him keep them shut a second longer than he needed to, a man holding a thing that couldn't be bought, and afraid to open his eyes and find the price tag. Sunday, she said. Your sisters decided by Sunday.
the last night. Then Sunday, Julian said, we find out which of us she's willing to be. Sunday came the way the last night of the fair always came, too fast and gold and loud with the particular ache of a thing about to fold its legs for a year. The June evening hung warm and violet over the harbor. Fried dough sweetened the air, and under it the green of trampled grass and the tin tang of Maggie's lemonade, and, out past the parking field, the salt breath of the water going dark. The carousel wheezed its waltz. Nora set out the table one last time and read the palms that came. A girl afraid of leaving home, who was told she was afraid of being right about leaving, which was braver. A tired man who wanted to hear his garden would come back, and did. And in the lull, she looked up, and the crowd was parting, grudgingly, the way a river shoulders around a rock it doesn't like, and Camille Ashford came through it in a plain summer dress that had never once been to a function, with a leather folder under her arm, and her brother nowhere in sight. "He's not with me," Camille said, before Nora could look past her. "I asked him to wait by the water. This part is mine." She did not sit. She set the folder on the vinyl, beside the sugar tin, and opened it. And inside were the trust papers, and beside the signature line, where an Ashford trustee had already signed in a hand that pressed too hard and went through the paper, the ink still faintly wet. "You signed it," Nora said. "I signed it into the trust. The field goes to the fair, forever. No Ashford holds it again." Camille's chin was up, but her hand, laying the pen down, shook the way it had shaken on the glass. "I decided which of us I was willing to be. I'm not willing to be the woman who kept my brother safe by keeping him in the car. Our grandfather sat in a parking field for 22 summers because someone in his life would have called wanting it out loud a breakdown. And I have been that someone to Julian since we were young. And I am resigning the post." She pushed the folder the last inch across the vinyl into the throw of the string lights, and Nora saw what it cost her. The whole family steadiness of a lifetime laid down on a card table. "There's a line for the air. It needs a Bellamy of the Harbour Light Fair. That's you, or it's no one. And if it's no one, the whole thing lapses again, and my brother keeps a field and starves on it." Her grey eyes came up, wet and clear. "I was wrong about you. I came to press a wound, and you told me it was mine, and you were right. And I've been sitting in a very good hotel for 3 days, learning that being right is not the same as being kind, which I understand is a thing you say. I'm sorry. For the photograph remark, and the scarves, and all of it." A breath. "Sign it, Miss Bellamy. That my grandfather finished the one true thing he ran out of time to do." Nora looked at the pen, and the line, and the sea chest waiting under her table with 11 letters in a hard black hand. She thought of Lucette coming off a boat with a deck of cards, teaching a girl that a palm was just a face people forgot to guard. She picked up the pen, and she signed her name, Nora Bellamy, on the line a proud man had left open a season too soon. And the field passed out of the reach of money and into the keeping of the fair forever, the way it should have 22 summers before. "There," Camille said, and let out a breath that seemed to take a decade of holding with it. She closed the folder. Then, awkward, unpracticed, a woman doing a thing she had no folder for, she put out her hand, not to shake, palm up, offered the way her brother had learned to offer his. "Read mine. For real. I never let anyone, and I flew commercial, and I've earned it." Nora took the hand and turned it to the string lights, and read the sister who had held a family steady while it trained itself not to feel, and told her the true thing all the way down. And Camille's cool gray eyes went bright, and she paid $10 into the sugar tin and held Nora's fingers a second too long. "Only about strangers," Nora said, when Camille asked if she was always right. "Never about myself. Go find your brother. He's terrible at waiting. He was at the water, where she'd been told he'd be, at the edge of the dark harbor with the fair's gold at his back and his good shoes in the mud. And he turned when he heard her come across the parking field, and she held up the closed folder so he could see the thing was done. You lost the field, Nora said.
I gave it away. Julian's voice cracked clean down the middle, the way it had a year ago at a dark table. Except there was nothing behind the crack now, but the thing the wall had kept out for 30 years. I signed everything to Camille to execute the second I understood it. The fund, the position, all of it. I let it go before you signed, so you'd know I didn't do it to arrange you into wanting me. I did it because you were right at my grandfather's table before I was born. The field was never the thing. He looked out at the black water, then back, and the string lights of the fair caught the good grey of his summer suit and the pale seam across his open hand. You told me the day I understood it was the day my life would start. It's Sunday. The field's gone, and I've never in my life felt less like a man sitting in a car. Julian. Nora crossed the last of the mud. You still don't know your fortune. You paid for it a year ago and I gave you a warning instead. Give it to me now then. His hand came up, palm open, offered. The true one. I can afford it. I have exactly nothing left but what I can't be sold, and you. And I'm counting on your grandfather being right, that those are the same thing. She took his scarred hand one last time, and she did not read it. She folded it closed around her own, the brass ring cool between their palms, and she gave him the fortune with her eyes, the way she'd once accused him of reading her, and this time there was no wall to get through. Your life started, Nora said. That's the whole reading. It'll be tips as the spirit moves you. Behind them, the carousel wound down and started up again, bright and tinny and indifferent, and Julian Ashford laughed. The rusty, startled, cracked open sound she'd pulled out of him at a card table, the hinge learning the trick of itself. And out past the parking field, the last Ferris wheel of the summer turned its slow gold circle against the violet dark, and neither of them let go. They kept the fair standing. That is the plain end of it, and the whole of it. The field belongs to the fair now, in a trust no developer can pry open, with a clause in a proud man's hard black hand that says there must always be a Bellamy at a card table on the ground to turn over the next lost soul's hand and tell them the thing they've already decided. Harbor Point was never built. The fountain nobody was allowed to touch was never poured. Every June, the rides come back and wheeze their waltz over the trampled grass, and the fried dough sweetens the air, and Maggie sells sugar water and complains about the ice, and raises her prices on the ice cream man, and never once on the fortune teller. And when a certain grey-suited man drinks her lemonade, she still puts it on the house, and still calls it mostly sugar and spite. Though these days, she says it like a woman handing over a dowry. Nora still reads palms for tips. The sign still leans against the sugar tin. What your hands already know. And beneath it, in the smaller letters Lucette painted, tips as the spirit moves you. The card with the 11 words lives no longer under the felt lining. It sits framed on the mantel of a house near the water, beside a photograph of a sugar tin, beside a sea chest of letters 2 families finally read all the way through. And on quiet nights, when the last ride goes dark, a man with a scar across his hand folds himself into the chair across her table without asking, and puts his palm up in the string lights, and lets her read him again, badly needing it, and not needing it at all, which she has told him is the only honest reason to sit down at a table like hers. She reads her own hand now. Once a year, the last night, when the tin is nearly full for once. She never tells anyone what it says, but she turns her grandmother's brass ring around her finger while she does it, and she smiles the way Lucette smiled, telling you nothing, and if you knew her at all, you'd understand that she is simply reading, out loud, and in her own voice at last, the thing she had already decided, and was, for one long year, too brave and too scared to hear. "Enjoy the fair," she'd tell you, and if this is the kind of story that warms the long way home, the guarded heart cracked open, the last prediction come true, the fortune finally read aloud, then stay a while at our table, subscribe, and let the next one turn your hand over. The spirit, as ever, takes only what moves you.